You're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm Talia Baroncelli. Today I'll be joined by political scientist Dr. Saeed Rahnema. We'll be discussing the issue of workers' control and workers' participation in councils. If you'd like to support us, please don't hesitate to go to our website and give us a boost. You can hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen and make sure you get onto our mailing list. Like and subscribe to the show if you can on YouTube or on other podcast streaming services such as Spotify and Apple. See you in a bit with Saeed Rahnema. I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Saeed Rahnema. He is a retired political science professor as well as professor of public policy at York University in Toronto, Canada. He was the director of the York School of Public Policy and Administration and a director of the nonprofit Middle East Economic Association. He was born and raised in Iran and was a member of the Industrial Management Institute there. During the Iranian Revolution of 1979, he was a leading activist in the Left and Workers' Council movement, as well as being a founder and member of the executive of the Union of the Workers and Employee Councils of one of the largest industrial conglomerates in Iran, known as IDRO. His recent publications include The Transition from Capitalism, as well as Neoliberal Imperialism, the latest stage of capitalism. We'll be discussing some of these works in future interviews, but today we'll be largely focusing on workers' councils. So it's really great to have you here, Dr. Rahnema. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you. That's great.
Well, it's nice to see you virtually, of course, since you taught at York for many years, where I also attended, but I sadly never attended your course on war and peace in the Middle East. So it's great to see you here now.
Sure.
So 2 years ago or so, you wrote a really interesting piece called The Inconceivability of Real Workers' Control Under Capitalism. And this was published in the International Labor and Working Class History publication, which is a really well-known journal looking into labor struggles and that sort of thing. And this might have come as a surprise to some people who perhaps know some of your history, given the fact that you were a large proponent of workers' councils and workers' control in Iran. And during the Iranian Revolution, you were a founder of one of the largest union of workers and employee councils known as the Shohras, which arguably contributed to the downfall of the Shah's regime. So it's really noteworthy that you wrote these particular pieces criticizing what you call the inconceivability of workers' control. And in 1992, you also wrote another piece titled The Illusion of Workers' Control. So for someone who was such a large proponent of workers' control and workers' councils to then talk about the illusion of workers' councils is really quite a shift. So maybe you can explain what led to this particular shift in your view and what you think has been the main cause or reason for the failed movement of workers' management and workers' control.
By all means, yes. First of all, happy 1st of May. You know, that's a great day that we have this discussion, you know. First, I would like to make several points and clarification. As you know, discussion of council movements and workers' control deal with two levels of organization. At the workplace for control of production and also at the political system for control of levels of government. My focus is on the first one, although it's very much related to the second one, as I will discuss. Also, I differentiate between managerial councils, which is self-management, and also participative councils where workers participate along with managers. Also, at the beginning, I would like to emphasize that while I'm critical of councilism, I do believe that the emancipation of the producing class, using Marxist terminology, is not possible as long as the appropriating class controls the production processes. Thus, the precondition for the liberation of producers of wealth is the takeover of control and production processes. No doubt about it. But the key question is that under what circumstances and how such a major transformation can take place. Well, as you mentioned, I was a serious believer of council system, and I'm still for the future, but not for the present. But I was inspired by the Russian Soviets and had the chance to be practically involved in such a movement during the Iranian Revolution. Uh, with its disastrous failure at a later stage, I had the chance to study and review all the major councils during the history, and the and also the then I came up with a different conclusions. Um, the starting point of all of these cases, of course, as you know, is the Paris Commune, where Marx initially was very much impressed by it, called it a political form at last discovered. Although at a later stage, he drew a different conclusion, said that this was a rising of a town under exceptional conditions, and that the majority of commune was in no sense socialist, nor could it be. And even he said that a simple compromise with Versailles maybe would have produced better results. Then we have the Soviets of Russian Soviet or Russian councils of the 1905 and 1917, both in February and the October revolutions. And also we had the Russian factory committees, which are the councils at the workplace. Also, we have the German, historically, major instances are German Rate during the German Revolution of 1918, 1919. Then we have the Italian internal commissions during the two so-called red years of 1920. And then the Spanish, Polish, Hungarian, and finally the Iranian case. All of these councils were products of major political crisis, and they were eliminated once the crises were over. So this was a very important conclusion. I give a few examples here. For example, the Russian Soviets that played such an important role in the several Russian revolutions, and Lenin called them organized forms of dictatorship of proletariat and organs of political power, soon became rubber stamp of the Communist Party. The dictatorship of proletariat became dictatorship of the party, and then eventually dictatorship of leader under Stalin. The factory committees, which is the focus of our attention for workers' control, they played a very significant role in managing the many of the companies during the revolution. But in 1918, were transformed into state-run trade unions. Later, they became part of a troika, a triad of the Communist Party cell of the factory, and the union and the management. And then eventually under Stalin, it was disbanded. Of course, after Stalin, some of these councils continued, but they were organs of the state, mostly for managing the affairs of the state policies rather than workers' control. In Germany, also, the factory councils were very significant during the revolutions that I mentioned, 1819. But because of the differences among socialists, social democrats, and also internal weaknesses, eventually they were disbanded. And the same thing we see it for the very famous Turin councils of Italy. So all of these were short-lived. There were instances that some of the councils lasted longer, like in Yugoslavia under Tito in the 1950s, or in Algeria under Ben Bella in the 1960s, and also more recent cases of Venezuela under Chavez. This was because of the state protection and affiliation with the party in power. This tells us how significant is the relationship between the central organs and the councils, and whether the councils can survive or cannot survive without their support. But they were also demised when the political system that was supporting them changed. We have also other type of workers' council, as you know, in the after post Second World War in Europe. But these work councils are very different. They were sort of mechanism of workers' participation, and they declined as you know. So this is a very brief background of the cases that I have studied.
Well, that's a really interesting historical overview because there are numerous different cases there. And, you bring up the case of Yugoslavia, for example, under Tito, and how the workers' self-management councils were largely more successful than in the other cases, say in like the cases of the Soviets, for example, in the former Soviet Union, or actually in 1905 before it became the Soviet Union. And as well in the German case, in the second revolution of 1918, 1919, which you discuss, and in Italy. So if I understood correctly, you're saying that the councils were only largely successful if they actually had a stake in state power, if they were somehow involved in parliamentary control and state power, and without the support of the state, or without having direct access to the levers of power, there were, various instances in which they actually fizzled out. And of course, those historical examples will be different, and we could speak about that more later. So would you say that that is, I guess, the main reason why the councils didn't work, is if they didn't have the state power?
Yeah, this is definitely, this is one of the main reasons, because we are talking of large industries, major industries, that for smaller industries, of course, it's possible. A very small workshop can be owned by workers and controlled. We are not talking about those. It's about major industries, and because this involves ownership. In order to be able to manage, you need to own the factories. This ownership should come through socialization of means of production, that I will discuss the different types of it. So without the support of the state, these large industries could not possibly be surviving. And even in those cases that, as I mentioned, in Yugoslavia that you mentioned, which was one of the longest period of time that councils were actually controlling, was exactly because of the policy of the state. But that changed, and later this was shifted to market socialism. It became part of the participation of the workers, and then eventually after Tito, it changed completely. Yeah. But there are other factors, I mean, the preparedness of the working class is very significant, and in none of these cases workers were ready, because it takes a long time to be able to learn to manage these factories. Also, in many of the cases, these are not workers alone, but also the middle classes, the engineers, the managers, and their role is very significant. That's, if needed, I will discuss. With them, there are some problems. Without them, control was not possible.
Right, and there's obviously a larger theoretical debate about workers' councils and what conditions are necessary in order to support workers' councils and workers' self-management. And I think your critique would be that, the various recent contributions towards these different ideas of worker self-management, they have, lofty ideas of democracy, and they want to be able to put these ideas into practice, but they've largely failed, I think, is what
Yeah.
you would argue. And perhaps this is because of a historical blind spot, not actually looking at the historical instances in which the councils were successful or were not successful. So maybe you could speak about some of the recent
Yeah.
contributions to this theoretical debate on what is necessary for workers' councils, and perhaps why you would say they're not really accurate in terms of identifying why the councils were not successful.
Very, very, very good question. If I may, I would like to explain a little bit in detail without taking too much time.
Go ahead.
Theorization about workers' control historically, we can see three waves of theorization. The first one, the very early one, the original ones, are early 20th century. Then the second wave we have from the mid to from 50s to 70s, and then the third one we have in the 21st century. The continuation of each other, but I see several problems in these theories. There are so many ambiguities that many theorists have not explained. The original theorists, such as Anton Pannekoek, Hermann Gorter, Karl Korsch, they were critical of what Bolsheviks and German Social Democrats did to the Soviets and councils. And they were right in that, because of so many problems that they were involved. But they advocated for workers' council as the sole organization of the working class. So they didn't want any parties. They didn't want any unions. They thought these are the problem. Only workers can do it. Say, for example, Pannekoek mentioned that autonomous activity by the masses. All the focus was for that. Even Gorter was saying that labor unions, parliamentarism, all of these things are unnecessary, are a problem, and proletariat must make the revolution alone.
And sorry, just to interrupt for people who don't know, Pannekoek was writing around, I guess,
1920s, yes.
1920s,
1920.
around
19,
the time of the failed Second German Revolution.
yes, yeah. They were. Actually, he in a sense he's the founder of councilism, and it's not only for the workers' council but also workers' control at the national level. I mean, even in modern time, it becomes sort of council republic as opposed to parliamentary republic, and then all the discussion. As I mentioned, they were right about their criticism about what Bolsheviks to the Soviets. I mentioned very briefly, rapidly, what happened to those, but they were not clear that how workers alone would be able to control all the affairs of the society. It's interesting that Pannekoek and others were insisting on councilism at the time that the majority of the working class had sided with the right wing of the Social Democratic Party, which had taken the parliamentary path rather than Soviet type, and the councils favored by the USPD, the independents, the Spartakists, and then the communists. And it's interesting, in the first Congress that was formed, the Congress of Workers and Soldiers Councils in Germany, of the close to 490 delegates, the vast majority voted for parliamentary republic. There are lots of details. We have criticism of Rosa Luxemburg and this, and which we don't have time to get into it. Some of them, of course, like Karl Korsch, recognized this rightly, that the failure of the German Revolution was the result of lack of ideological preparedness of the working class. This is very significant at that time. And it stressed the need for further education, consciousness, and mobilization. Korsch also was, I think, in terms of theorization, has contributed most of all, because some of the issues that he raised at that time later was repeated without adding anything to it. Korsch linked the workers' control to the question of socialization of ownership. This is what I mentioned, that you cannot have control without ownership. He saw socialization either through expropriation, nationalization, communalization, taking place all at once through a revolution like what it happened in Russia, in China, in most of the socialist revolutions, or gradually, as, for example, people like Bernstein were suggesting. He recognized these two types, but he was, of course, against any gradual moving. He was very radical. He said that we should move toward eliminating completely the private property owners from the social process of production. Well, this is a policy that Soviets did immediately with all the problems, because in another series of studies, I did revisiting socialist revolutions. I explained how most of these revolutions moved toward immediate total socialization, and all of them failed. And all of them had to change the policy. Even Lenin changed it, but unfortunately, Stalin, when it came to power, followed the same old policy. Also, when we talk of, for example, socialization, Kautsky, it's interesting, at the same time, Kautsky was actually, as was responsible for the socialization committee of the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, when they were in power.
In Germany.
Yes, in Germany. He recognized two significant problems of bureaucratic autocracy and labor aristocracy. The first one is when private capitalists are replaced by an undemocratic bureaucracy, and the second one, all authority transferred to a privileged group of workers. He said that these two are problematic. But in order to resolve this problem, he said that we need a dual power. Parliament would control nationwide, and then councils work and control the factories. Korsch also was in agreement with Kautsky on this, but the difference was that Kautsky wanted this socialization to take step by step, sector by sector, but Korsch wanted all immediate. And another contribution of Korsch was recognizing the contradiction between producers and consumers. He said that if you only focus on producers, so the privileges that they get, the costs that involve, will have some impact on the consumers. So, and ironically, consumers are also workers of another factory, another factory. So we need to recognize and reconcile these problems, which was a very significant and important thing. Later I touch upon it. These were the early theories,
Yeah, these theories were largely developed during the First World War, and then this really interesting period during the First World War, leading up to the Second German Revolution. And
as you said, it's the First World War, and all the socialist revolutions that and the socialist movements that you see in different parts of Europe. Because I just mentioned Germany because we see it in Poland, we see it in Hungary, and in many other places. So there was a major workers' movement. And then in many cases, they moved toward some sort of workers' control. But this was the period of revolution, when revolution failed, when the right wing took over, so the situation changed. So these are the early.
Right, because there was a tension within the German Social Democratic Party. There was, the more right-wing elements of the party versus more left-wing elements represented by Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg, as you mentioned, and they were more in favor of this sort of workers' council having, direct control rather than a parliamentary form of trying to, change or redistribute power. But I guess their main goal was to have party unity. So there was a large criticism of them because during leading into the First World War, some more left-wing members of the party were opposed to the war, and they were trying to form an anti-war movement. And then in the end, they actually ended up voting for the war credits and supporting the First World War, and some of them took very nationalistic positions. So that's kind of an example of how this idea to have the unity within the party in order to actually be in power resulted in the betrayal of many of these values, which are so important.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Both the both extremes were, of course, in the problem. Usually, focuses only on the right wing aspect of the SPD, but also the left wing problem. I have in detail, written about this, but I don't want to get into it now. So both sides were responsible for the failure. As you said, rather than having unity, they started fighting with each other, and then of course we know the result that the failure of German Revolution meant the failure of the Russian Revolution. Even Lenin, Trotsky, and others were hoping that if German Revolution is successful in the second most advanced country of the time, then Russia would be in a good place. But that failure led to also to other failures. Anyways, that wave of these are the original theories that was left for a while, and then after several decades, we see in the as of mid 1950s, new theories emerge. People such as Cornelius Castoriadis, Antonio Negri, the autonomists, Hannah Arendt, Ken Coates, Ernst Mandel, so many of them. They focus on the autonomous and independent leadership by the workers, and for the workers. But in practice, none of them, could succeed anything. And again, it died down for a while. This is the second wave of theories that I mentioned. It's interesting that the theorization that came particularly after 1970s, was taking place at the time that major changes were taking place in capitalism. Neoliberalism was emerging, and there were lots of changes. We're moving from Fordism and even post-Fordism, moving away from standardized mass production in centralized large factories to flexible specialization, and the breakdown of production process into cluster of many smaller industries scattered around the globe. So this would make everything much more difficult for workers' control. In the Fordist model, you had Ford from large factories from all the processes in one location. Now, the process of the same Ford company You have uh, hundreds of major industries scattered around the world, which have got the second tier, third tier, so in this situation, this was taking place, and workers' control was becoming more difficult. And unfortunately, while some theorists referred to this, that in the era of neoliberalism, what has changed, some said that, well, it's there is no difference. In any case, workers can control even at this time, which I very much disagree with. Then the third wave of theories came again for several decades. The theorization almost dies down, and then the third wave starts from the early part of the 21st century, when we have got the square movement. We've got the Occupy movement. Impressed by all of these things, then we have got several major books come out. Very important books. Describing cases. I'm not going to name or refer to them here, but none of them explain how can you have workers' control, real self-management, in a situation that capitalists control everything, and neoliberalism has broken down all of these major industries, and how is it going to be possible? So this was very brief. Lots of things can be said about it. Even in terms of not only workers, but in terms of cooperatives. Cooperatives are also mostly are small and medium. They can be successful. But the large corporations, the large cooperatives cannot avoid capitalist system. The best example is Basque's Mondragon Corporation. I'm not going to say anything bad about it, because it's an amazing company, huge company. But what it does, it's holding, operating globally, and taking advantage of cheaper labor in Central and South America, while the management system is definitely more progressive, and there are less difference among them. But again, we have got wage differentials, and then many of the managers of the companies, of the corporation, are professional managers. So we cannot say that this is workers' control. We have also Argentinian cooperatives, which emerged in the 2000 afterward, and those are also very much reliant whether state can support them or not. And with the changes taking place in Argentina now, unfortunately, the right wing, I don't know what will happen to them. Anyway, very simply put, some of the theoretical questions that are not answered is that how workers' control possible without ownership?
Well, that was actually my next question, because this is really the crux of what you're talking about, is what you call this catch-22 between workers' control and workers' participation, because your historical work has shown that real workers' control, in which it's not the capitalists who are co-opting the struggle, but the workers themselves who are sort of driving political change, and who are in control of the means of production, that is not, in fact, possible under current capitalist conditions. And real workers' control is only possible in a sort of post-capitalist society and you would argue that there would have to be some form of democracy as well. So this transition is required. But it's not workers' participation that actually gets you to that transition, to a post-capitalist society in which workers' control is really possible. But workers' participation is necessary to improve the living conditions and working conditions of workers. So things like the minimum wage, better conditions in factories or at the workplace, or in the knowledge industry or whatever it might be. So participation is still necessary to get to a certain standard, but it could also lead to de-radicalization or to other elements such as, the managerial class or the upper echelons of the capitalist class being involved in workers' participation and sort of resulting in a de-radicalization of that movement. So this is really the contradiction: is you can't have true workers control without a change in the system. But what should people do? Just not fight for any sort of improvement in their condition or participation? What would you say to that binary or that tension?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Of course, proponents of workers' control, they say that no, it's possible that we have workers' control under capitalism, which, I'm questioning that. But the question is that if workers' control is not possible under capitalism, and at the same time, we know that workers' participation also has got its own problem. Workers' participation came through the sort of corporatist tripartism that emerged in different countries of Europe. And while it had many successes, but also it had its failures. Part of it, they argued that this is against class struggle, and also this is de-radicalizing. So the argue is that if workers' control is not possible and workers' participation de-radicalizes workers and dilutes class struggle, then what should be done? This is a catch 22 that I mentioned. The whole idea is that we can have participation, but with a different situation. Why tripartism failed? Because in a situation that the capitalists are so powerful, this capitalist state mainly represent the interests of capitalists. So the tripartism is very obvious. The workers are very weak. At the same time, here I didn't mention about the changes in working class. Working class has there have been lots of changes in working class. Working class is not the way it was depicted or expected in Capital by Marx and later by Lenin and others. We have a very highly segmented working class now. We have new classes, We have the new middle classes. And here, even the theoretical notion of working class is problematic. Should we consider all those who sell their labor, manual labor and mental labor, as working class? Well, in relation to capital, yes, all of them are workers. But in socially, politically, culturally, they are very different. And I really do not agree with those who said that all of them are workers. It's so different. They are highly differentiated, and I believe that we should separate them. So, working class is weaker. Capitalists are stronger. Capitalist state is so tripartism fails in this case. In this case, but in order to be able to we know that workers' control is impossible, but participation through sort of something that I call radical industrial democracy is possible. That you would allow, workers gradually become stronger and stronger, more educated, and would be able to participate more.
You've just been watching part 1 of my discussion with Dr. Saeed Rahnema. Join us for part 2, where we'll be discussing the necessary requirements to help enable workers' control and workers' councils. See you in a bit.